while we are fixing the computer, I can start the third part of the session. This is actually an overview of tools IRENA developed to support capacity building in the field of district energy systems. As you know, IRENA, we are an international organization who support countries in the development deployments of renewable energy system, out of which heating and cooling solutions are eligible. I'm part of the Innovation and Technology Center, which is headquartered in Germany, and there I lead the activity on project development. Today and yesterday we had very interesting aspects of the requirements to access finance to make project happen based on those technical concepts. And for us it's very important to support public, private stakeholders, so companies, associations, municipalities, to understand how to make a project actually attractive to a financier. We use the term bankability, which is a new word, which means essentially the ability of a project to access financing. This term is very today common in the climate and the energy financing. Means essentially how a bank or an investor will perceive a given project. So it is the project developer, it is the person who prepared the proposal, its responsibility to make a project, to develop it to a level where a bank or investor can make a decision to enter or not into the project. And this very often has a lot of different aspects. We'll see very shortly in this presentation. As well, we have prepared a very short summary of an upcoming detailed overview of bankability for district energy system, which we develop not only through our own analysis, but as well with discussions with the typical companies which will advise banks and investors to enter into projects. So what we do, we extract the key terms, the key aspect that someone needs to put in a proposal, and will be discussed during a project financial closing with different stakeholders, whether investors, the municipalities, and so on. So important aspect related to how to make a project being developed on the ground. So I also know we are two person left for the lunch, so we'll try to be concise. Everything I'm going to present today will be available as outcome of the workshop. So I'll probably skip a bit some steps. So while it loads, how do we deliver those capacity building? So essentially we prepare some tools, templates, guidelines that we are thereafter sharing with organizations to organize those training workshops. This is the basis where we help and we coach stakeholders that are in charge of developing, preparing project proposals. Typically as well, we have expert views, typically from a bank or an organization, which will evaluate whether a specific proposal is ready to enter into financing. And there, typically in the span of 4 to 5 days, we work to improve and make sure that all the elements of a project are at the level where a decision with financing parties can be done. Very good. So, I think the computer is back. So IT.
Yeah, but
yes. So half of IT is ready. So yes. The first thing is that through IRENA we provide those informations and those activity free of charge to all IRENA members. So it means this is really meant to be an unbiased, accessible approach to help more projects in the field of heating and cooling access financing. This is typically channeled importantly through the focal point of the country. So whether you are interested to work and get support from those type of, thank you very much, those activity, those are done through a member country focal point. So key points of what it is about bankability. So bankability is about perception. Perception is related to how your project will be presented to an investor, to a bank. Typical barrier for to improve those perception is essentially the ability of one investor or one bank to finance a project. So whether the project has the size, relevant size to a specific financing instrument. As well, we had the presentation on geothermal. Is the risk profile of a project sufficiently described, sufficiently outlined, so people can evaluate themselves the risk of the project? And of course, capacity to implement the project on at the local level. So this will be often a key important criteria. The issue is often to translate certain concept, technical concept, into economic and financial information. What I always do say is that banks, financiers have their own language, which is not the same, not often the same as engineers, technicians, which will be in charge of developing the concept, the design of a specific project. So bankability is also about speaking the same language. So whenever a project developer or an urban or a municipality present a project, they need to present the indicator that the bank or the investor will be attracted to. So typically IRR, so return on investment, ability to repay a loan, and so on will be key indicators to base a decision. So as well, what we found out through evaluation of different countries' experience is that funding access is not transparent. Very often when you are a private company or a small or medium-sized city, all those financing instruments are very intransparent in the aspect of what kind of technology are eligible, what is the size of the project, the cycle, and so on. Through IRENA platforms, project facilitation platform, we aim as well to help greater transparency to access financing, because we know project development, developing a project on a district energy project, also when you start a project you have a target on your head, we mean that you are going to mobilize resources to your project. So you need to access quickly or enter into discussion with parties which will provide financing for the final implementation. One of the platform IRENA provides called Project Navigator. This is a free online platform which provides open source, transparent guidelines in the development of renewable energy project. We started with power project, which is the typical project member countries of IRENA are interested of, and now, thanks to the work we are conducting with especially countries in the southern European region, we are delving into heating and cooling projects. So the same methodology to convince an investor to invest in a power project, we are deriving it for heating and cooling project in the context of cities. And for this we work with the typical lending advisor which will advise banks to enter into a project. So we ask them what is the secret formula, which is not so secret. Very quickly, all those information are provided in different shape and form. We have an online platform, and as well we provide training workshops and webinars to help you advance in your project. The scope of our work, our recent work on heating and cooling, is related to the aspect of how can we support medium-sized cities to access financing to develop district energy system. Here we're looking at different end uses, residential, industrial, and commercial. We're looking at the scope as a project which will improve the dynamic behavior of thermal system to match the load, the demand in different environments. The eligible scopes we have worked is multiple. So we have a look at solar technologies. We have had an example of solar thermal, but we are looking, for example, the use of solar photovoltaics with heat pumps, solar thermal, low temperature, and as well concentrated solar power. We as well look at cogeneration through biomass. We have excluded so far waste to energy for the reason Greg from EBRD mentioned, but we looked at biogas and geothermal technologies. So all of those combined with storage technologies help to develop an object that you need to present to a bank, and you need to convince a bank that your project has a reasonable prospect to deliver returns and repay a specific loan over its lifetime. So very quickly as well, I wanted to show you a bit key elements of those bankability requirements. So as I mentioned earlier, this is not the point of view of the bank. This is the point of view of the project developer. So the banks typically will see a project at the last stage of the development work, where all the permitting that the president of EGEC mentioned is done, all the technical design activity are conducted, you have a credible information about the resource, the technologies, the demand, and so on. Those, the bank and its advisor will evaluate them. But to compile this data, and the issue of access to data was mentioned, you need to start with different steps. The first steps is called identification. So essentially what we are trying to do for a developer is that we start from a start point which is typically you realize there is a large heating or cooling demand, you understand there is accessible resources, for example surplus heat from production or industries, and you are tasked to develop a proposal or concept to access financing and implement a district energy project. So this will not be the case of the bank. This will be the pathway, the journey of the project developer. So we break down the activity into 6 phases. Why are we doing this? Because those phases are the ones that you need to complete to build a bankable project development. So first project is essentially realizing that there is an opportunity, discussing, understanding which are the stakeholders, and moving into evaluating different project scenarios. Here you need, for district energy systems, to have early costing estimation, because the time scale of those projects is longer than the typical renewable energy project. So in the typical solar wind project, we're looking at project lifespan of 15 to 25 years. For district energy system, the lifespan is more around 40 to 50 years, with loan repayment period between 20 and 30 years. So it means you need to understand how the project will be operated around in this period, because banks will be specifically interested to understand during the period where you have to repay a loan how the project is managed and deliver the return that you presented. This phase as well involve, Patrick mentioned about location, understanding the policy requirement, assessing the different type of fuel that is currently existed, and understanding whether there is synergies between existing assets and the new one you want to develop. So here, this was mentioned before, a key criteria will be the scale of the system. So when the project developer will develop this kind of project, in the network design discussion, the scale will be very often something that the banks and the investor will discuss. Why did you choose this scale, and why not another scale? So you need to build a strong, credible evidence that you understand how the design matches the demand of a given environment. The second phase is, I think, for most of us, very straightforward, but in project development approach, it's very important. You need to screen potential non-feasible alternatives. So very often, because project development is a teamwork, people will come up with different ideas to develop the project. You need to discuss with different stakeholders. In the case of municipality, it will involve different agencies, different departments within a city, that all together they want to achieve their own version of a project. However, very often, I would say more than 50% of the time, the screening phase is failed, which means that people are developing a non-feasible alternative. And the advisors of banks will discuss this. So you didn't select the appropriate project alternative against your demand and the resource available in a given environment. So very important, two aspects here: shortlist of all resources available, I mean all, so understanding what are the trade-offs between a renewable or a hybrid district energy system, and looking at energy densities. So typically, importantly, that density lower than 5 kWh per square meters will be deemed unfeasible. So here as well, we need to understand the different technologies. So here, early on in the project development phase, will come the discussion around what kind of technology. So we're looking at solar thermal, integrating storage, underground, and so on. So here, the key aspect will be the specific cost or the capex per unit of power. So understanding that this will be the drivers, and IRENA provide, by the way, a detailed cost of all renewable energy sources accessible every year on our website. The second part is to understand the temperature profile. This was a key part of Miloš's presentation, and also Patrick, looking at what kind of temperature profile you will base your project. So for district heating system, we're looking at typically between 70 and 90 degrees. For cooling system, we'll see a bit later, looking at between 6 and 12 degrees. The part important as well is when you move from the screening phase, you need to assess the merits, the benefit of all the configuration of a given project. So here typically you will have a discussion between this load curve that we saw in different presentations and the relationship between capacity and cost. So here the discussion will be evaluating the merit of a given technology against the capacity to fulfill consumer demand. So in our platform, we provide the tools to help build those piece of discussion to ultimately select the most promising project configuration. So two aspects very important for district energy system integrating renewable is to work on the duration and the demand curve to really make a good, let's say, case when you are justifying that you chose giving a specific project configuration. The third aspect important is to understand who are all the stakeholders within your environment. So as well, evaluating in terms of geographical or spatial planning, which are the stakeholders, but as well in terms of business model or business processes that you will need to mobilize to implement the project. Very important as well, this is typically very fast if all the steps before have been correctly implemented. Selection phase of the best alternative for a given project. So in this approach, you have an opportunity, then you have many project options, maybe 10, 15, and ultimately you, within your team, the project development team, you select the most promising one. Tools to help this include, for example, no, it's not here. So we have a decision matrix where all the parameters can be compared, scored, and you have a rank between different project alternatives. Once you have moved to select the most promising alternative, this is where typically a resource, financial resource, staff will be mobilized to deliver the design and engineering studies. So this is the typical project development activity that people are familiar with, and then I will not enter into details. Important part of the project proposal is to provide credible studies in the design network development and the what we call production technologies. Key part that will be scrutinized by advisors of banks and investors. As well important to prepare procurement plan and provide credible information how you will procure, select, procure, and implement the different subsystems. Essentially, at the end of those approach, I will go a bit quicker. Yes, I will go. So you have achieved a level where you understand with the team which is the most feasible options. You have made preliminary pre-feasibility and feasibility studies, and then an important part is to prepare the contractual negotiation part. So there is different contracts involved. Project financing clause is all about contracts. The developer should not write the contract because they will be negotiated, but the developer should prepare the inputs to the contract. So it's not to a lawyer to actually provide the input. The lawyer will have negotiates the most satisfying terms for all the contracts involved in investment, construction, operation, and so on. So here, all the input, the technical inputs in the last phase will be translated into financial metrics and legal language. So important as well here to be supported early on by experienced established advisors which can provide those value in those environments. Important as well, usually discussion around financial closing will involve some sort of financial modeling. So not everyone is a financial expert. So IRENA, through our platform, we provide financial modeling guidance. So we provide example of financial models that will help you start a discussion with the bank or investor. What we always say is that the banks already have their own financial model. You will not change them. So what you need is to prepare your model so you can compare inputs and outputs of a given financial modeling. There is key criteria, I mentioned it, return on investment, ability to cover the loan, it's called DSCR. All of those are important, but ultimately the role of the developer is to prepare the inputs and making sure that you have an understanding on how the bank is modeling your project. If you don't do this, the project will be discounted. So if you say my project will generate 100 megawatt hour, the bank will say no, it will provide 50 megawatt hour because the inputs were not credible enough. So all those steps is to provide, is to convince someone that your preparations are enough to move to be financed. Lastly, but I will finalize here, we also provide inputs or advice to prepare the construction, operation, and decommissioning of the project. Not that it's part of the development, it's because overall financier will ask you a question about this. How do you plan the decommissioning in 50 years? If you say it's already planned, then you are wrong. Nobody planned in 50 years. So you need to have a measure. For example, I'm maintaining a maintenance service reserve account that ultimately will be used to decommission part or refurbish part of the project. Those will be the part that people in the financing table will ask from the project developer. So all those are essentially preparations to have a successful negotiation or understanding with financing parties. Because we recognize at IRENA that there is a gap between technical approach, design, understanding of the demand or interest of a city to develop a district energy system, and the expectation of the bank, which are called bankability, so ability to enter into your project. And this gap can be reduced by following a structured project development approach, for which IRENA provide guidance, tools, and so on, as well as active support on a regional basis for district energy project developer. So this is the end of what I had for today. Just so you know, we are basing those as well with existing case studies, looking at district energy project in developed countries like Denmark, looking at some, for example, in China, and making sure that the project developer approach we are proposing match the state of the art today in the project development. So without further ado, I will directly pass the floor to the last presentation because we are a bit tired, but if you have any questions on this, I'm available after the lunch to provide information. But just so you know, all those information are provided free of charge and accessible online to you and all IRENA members. Thank you very much.